Hello, good morning and welcome. It's Wednesday, November the 12th. Just before midnight, a senior government figure got in touch with me to describe Keir Starmer's number 10 and a series of briefings that he is going nowhere, whatever members of his government think, as bonkers. They said it was paranoid. They said his team was not thinking straight, and they said they were all in tinfoil hat territory. This is the state of affairs involving a prime minister elected by a landslide just 16 months ago. My name is Sam Coates of Sky News.
And I'm Anne McElvoy from Politico. Yesterday afternoon, there was a series of near identical briefings from allies of Keir Starmer, clearly coordinated, WhatsApping journalists, offering those briefings around, including to your morning duo, all with the same fundamental message. If Keir Starmer were challenged by anyone, including members of his own cabinet after the budget, then he would stand and fight. But in doing so, the Prime Minister's team appear to have created from almost nowhere a crisis and a question mark over his leadership.
But there was more, and listeners to this podcast might just feel that a lot of what is about to come is a little familiar. Allies of Keir Starmer told other journalists what our listeners heard on Monday, that there was one particular cabinet minister going around saying the Prime Minister was a dead dug and plotting to bring him down. Now, as you know, Anne, on Monday, I didn't name that cabinet minister because the whole thing seemed quite fanciful, a rather politically crude exercise by allies of Keir Starmer to smoke out a plot based on not very much. There wasn't the evidence, and there was a heavy denial from that cabinet minister, so I likened the whole briefing to a plotline from the traitors. Anyway, allies of Keir Starmer have doubled down in the last 48 hours and went around naming the traitor as Wes Streeting, the health secretary, as the man plotting to bring down Keir Starmer potentially after the budget.
To Wes. And overnight, we have the spectacle of Streeting's spokesman issuing an on-the-record denial that he is trying to topple the Prime Minister. And it went like this. These claims are categorically untrue. Wes's focus has been entirely on cutting waiting lists for the first time in 15 years, recruiting more GPs and rebuilding the NHS. That saved his life. Note the added pathos there. And he's been tweeting first thing this morning, looking chipper. Good morning. Good morning to you too, Wes. Really looking forward to setting out plans to modernise the NHS and reinvest billions from cutting bureaucracy at the front line to cut waiting lists. You can feel that perhaps being written through gritted teeth and to show that he is getting on with the day job.
Gritted teeth is a nice way of putting it. I think that's just dripping in sarcasm, that tweet. Look, he knows he's not going to spend the morning talking about the NHS waste that he is going to be able to say that he's cut. We are just at an incredible moment for allies of Keir Starmer, and Team Streeting, by the way, know exactly who's been doing the briefing. And what's striking is that it's more than one person briefing. So as you mentioned before, it's a coordinated effort that has had some thought into it. For allies of Keir Starmer to be briefing that Wes Streeting is going to bring down the PM or try to bring down the PM without producing any evidence while keeping the health secretary in post is simply incredible. In the process, they are utterly advertising a new level of chaos and dysfunction at the top of government. And we've been talking for a few days, a couple of weeks, about budget pitch rolling. This is budget pitch rolling on a whole new level. I don't think anyone else in Labour would have put this on their grid.
I was going to say, if this is the smooth pitch rolling, please save us from the chaotic version. Today is Prime Minister's Questions, where Streeting won't be alongside the Prime Minister, disappointingly, for all of us, because he's going to be in Manchester. The headlines were meant to be dominated there by the news that he has reached a settlement with the Treasury over who would pay for those NHS England redundancies, which were part of his bigger 10-year plan for NHS reform. But in a matter of minutes, Streeting is going to be doing the morning round of TV and radio interviews, and he is going to have to reject, to deny, to laugh off accusations that he is the source of that activity and activism, really, in terms of the cabinet, and doubts about Keir Starmer. He's going to have to tell everyone repeatedly how loyal he is. and he has to support the Prime Minister politically. Now, Wes Streeting, as we know, is one of the more polished media performers around Keir Starmer, but I think going on the telly effectively to deny that he thinks the Prime Minister's career is over is probably not one that we had on the bingo card there, Sam.
No, I mean, even as this podcast is being recorded, I'm getting ministers messaging in baffled about what's going on. It's so completely weird. One has just messaged me, and there are still three dots because they're typing. So I'll bring you what else they say in a moment. But just pause for a moment. So, allies of Keir Starmer have proactively decided to brief that the Prime Minister is strong enough to face down any challenge, particularly if it comes after the budget. So, what does that do? As we say, it makes most Labour MPs no less, wonder why Keir Starmer's team are talking about a challenge in the first place. Number 10 appear to have deliberately and explicitly decided for their own political benefit to get people to talk about the chance of a challenge to Keir Starmer before Christmas, presumably as a means of insulating, protecting him and flushing stuff out, thereby creating in the process a massive sense of crisis, which, while listeners to this podcast might have had a sense of, were absolutely not on the agenda 24 hours ago. Then, if that's not enough, personally embroiling him in a row with one of his most prominent cabinet ministers. I mean, nobody this morning is talking about Wes Streeting quitting, but it just follows, Anne, that if the Prime Minister's team literally don't trust him to this extent, literally say he is working against the man at the top, and by implication are saying that he's not focused on the health brief, I just want to put the question out there, how can they keep him? And by the way, it's not just me asking that question. That was a question somebody was asking me last night. Labour figures up and down the spectrum last night judged that all of this intervention has had the opposite effect that allies of Keir Starmer would have wanted. Rather than showing his strength by promising to face down plotters, something you normally get kind of in the final year of a Prime Minister's life, Keir Starmer has massively weakened his position by doing all of this. One message to say Starmer's demise is now inevitable. And do you agree with that basic analysis? Do you think Keir Starmer this morning is weaker or stronger?
I don't think we know that yet, Sam. I think they were trigger happy in the way that we've been talking about. And there's just such a lot of eye-popping detail. I know you will be having some that you're going to be talking about on Sky. But if you look at the playbook this morning from Politico, everything from Morgan McSweeney racing down Whitehall to clearly having, I think, heard news of the escalation of this in the early evening, heading back to number 10. It was a real moment of active in the moment drama. It doesn't look like something that they'd laid out. They knew what they were doing and they were just going to do this counter briefing and then move on. It does appear to be a very kinetic situation. That's the reason I say we don't really know what's going to happen next. Let's look at the arguments, if you like, for Keir Starmer or for Keir Starmer's supporters getting out ahead of this. Well, one is that it potentially forces the hand of other cabinet ministers and key players to signal whether they back Wes or whether they back Keir Starmer. Now, it could say it's a slight odd thing for Wes Streeting to have, shall we say, been so free with his criticism that this is set off now just before a critical budget, which everybody knows is very, very serious for the country, as well as for the political fortunes of those involved. So my guess is that the thinking of those around number 10 who want to isolate Wes Streeting politically is that you say, this is really dreadful. Do you really approve of this happening now? The second argument is, and we refer to this this morning in Playbook, it is how will investors and markets respond? Government bonds, we know bond markets make and break a lot of fortunes these days. If investors fear that Keir Starmer and possibly even probably Rachel Reeves with him are said to be ousted, this was something Kitty Usher, former Labour MP, who did a presentation on the economy to MPs last week, something she mentioned, that would be very damaging indeed. So in a way, yes, it looks dramatic sickly even. But asking those questions is, if you destabilize Keir Starmer, what are you going to get? That may be the defense that Number 10 and those allies have for bringing it all out into the open, messy as it is.
So there was just the odd sign last night that I was picking up that the Number 10 allies were starting to wind their neck in. That having done this hyper aggressive briefing, I picked up one signal that they realized that they had to pause it and maybe retreat, because I think as they saw it land in the media, they realized that it was going to cause the most almighty backlash, which is exactly what's happened overnight. So one minister has finished writing to me now as he was speaking. They say that they cannot understand what allies of Keir Starmer have been doing from any perspective. Listen, let's deal with those arguments that you just made head on. You're right. Labour High Command has been giving presentations, as we mentioned last week, from Kitty Usher, Greg McClymont and James Kirkup, that instability spooks the markets, and that if Rachel is gone and Keir and Rachel is gone, bond prices could go up, the cost of borrowing goes up, and therefore any kind of political turmoil could have an adverse cost to the amount of money that Rachel Reeves and the Exchequer have. But I feel like, again, last night's briefing may have had the opposite effect to the one intended. You know, when the market's open, if there is adverse market movement, otherwise known as political stupidity causing a rise in borrowing costs, then Labour will face the same accusation they hurled at Liz Truss, that there is now suddenly a moron premium because politics is impacting on the financial markets. So that is something that could be thrown back at them. And then you mentioned Wes Streeting. I just, talking around the cabinet and advisors, think that I am not absolutely sure that if Team Keir is trying to get everyone to put Wes Streeting back at his box, I'd automatically back Team Keir to win that trial of strength. Downing Street is weak at the moment. Nothing is landing. Policy, politics, it's a bit rotten, and everyone you speak to acknowledges that. And as for Wes, he's got close allies. Inside cabinet, outside cabinet, Rachel Reeves, Peter Kyle. We've talked about the Wesleyites. He's friends with Angela Rayner, who is the potential future kingmaker. You know, I am not sure that Wes loses in a trial of strength here. And that is what is one of the things that's so damaging.
True that, but the perception of disloyalty could damage Wes Streeting, and possibly in the following way. He is known to see himself as something of a crown prince. If he gets too far ahead on that, and it looks like that was at least the perception of those around Keir Starmer, and we've got to stop using this language. This doesn't happen without the principal himself saying, yes, it's fine to go out there and fight. I want you to fight on my behalf. So I'm going to say Keir Starmer obviously approved of going this way. Otherwise, it would never have kicked off to the extent that you've just described. And as talented as Wes Streeting is, there has often been a small degree of wariness, even among those who I think would like to support him as a potential leadership candidate in the future and think he's one of the best cabinet ministers all round in terms of his grip on his brief, his ability to charm and manipulate in a good way the media in the way that senior ministers need to be able to do. But there are occasional doubts about his judgment in appearing to be the heir presumptive. Andy Burnham syndrome as well looms large over this. Andy Burnham there, the mayor in Greater Manchester, who made his critical intervention there at the start of Labour conference and had to wind his neck and wind pretty much everything in because there was such an adverse reaction. So I think that is the balance. When you asked earlier, and it was a good question, I didn't answer, so I'm going to do it quickly. Can Keir go on with Wes Streeting in his job? I don't think he has any alternative to keeping Wes Streeting now at health foreseeably, because if he were to do anything that looked like he was downgrading him, he would simply start off the whole crisis again. So I think both sides will realise they have to try to cauterise this, but a lot of damage has just spilled out in public, hasn't it?
It has. And it's important to say, and I think listeners to this podcast know that there's a much higher level of instability and uncertainty in politics in private than even most of the headlines reflect. So yesterday, 24 hours ago, I was talking to somebody very senior in Labour, just sort of gaming out how any challenge would have to happen. It's not so much that Keir Starmer sacks Wes Streeting. It would have to involve Wes Streeting quitting as a cabinet minister. And just imagine that scenario. And imagine Wes Streeting does quit and says, I just don't think that Keir Starmer is the right person to lead the country. At that point, it would trigger such instability, I would not back Keir Starmer to necessarily win a trial of strength, even though Labour is a traditionally loyal party in that scenario.
You do still have to get round the difficult part that when the country feels like it's in an ongoing political crisis, Wes Streeting is the health secretary, and so much rides on the perception that the NHS is getting better, or at least has the chance to get better under a Labour government. To have this breakout over the head of the health secretary, some people saying he provoked it. You effectively seem to be arguing, Sam, along with a lot of people in the know, that Number 10 have just sort of lost the plot. You know, they didn't need to blow the bloody doors off, as they say in the Italian job. But yeah, it would just look terrible. I think it would look terrible for everyone involved. And I do take your point that Wes Streeting's probably got more support than anyone else I can think of for being the potential successor. But, you know, there'll be a lot of people close to him saying this is the moment to, you know, cool your jets, because if it goes off in the way that you're describing, at some point the public are just going to take a look at this and say, ugh, you told us you were the grown-ups. You told us this is the way that silly, exhausted, divided Tories behave. And now look at you. They will look from man to pig, and they will just they'll see George Orwell's Animal Farm.
Yeah, we're not exactly seeing politics tread more lightly on our lives, which is what Keir Starmer promised when he entered Downing Street. So where does this all leave us? Yesterday, I had a chat with someone very senior in Labour, not somebody you could really call a Starmerite, but somebody who is prepared to acknowledge that things are very bad at the top. But they gave me a very clear-headed analysis of just a bit of the bigger picture. And they had 3 points. First of all, just in practical terms, under the new Labour rules, the rules that we told you about first, that changed since last year, Anne, a proper plot to unseat the Prime Minister does require 80 MPs to go public behind a challenger. And so it is still harder than if you're in the Tory party trying to oust a PM to get rid of them, because you can't rely on the anonymity, the letters that can suddenly topple over into a vote of no confidence. You need a named challenger, a stalking horse, and 80 Labour MPs prepared to have their disloyalty known in public. So that's really hard. And this person didn't think we were there yet. Secondly, they blame a lot of the instability on hot-headed 24 intake MPs panicking about the polls. But they pointed out these are people who just haven't been schooled in what it's like when politics gets difficult. Now, all of that reminded me of Boris Johnson and his allies blaming hot-headed Tory MPs from the 2019 intake. But my gut feeling about that is they were right at the start, but not at the end, because they got Boris Johnson in the end. And finally, they said, and this ties it all together, that while you can't see a challenge now after the budget, it'll be Christmas before you know it, they're much less sure that the PM survives after May, because they see very little of what's happening in Downing Street as functioning. Factionalism, narrow cliques giving advice, inter-C9 warfare, even amongst those around Keir Starmer. So that is not a foregone conclusion. So my conclusion is we are just going to get more rolling chaos all the way up to May. I cannot see what changes and what breaks out of that cycle. What do you think, Anne?
You remind me that what's missing here in this story and in the defence of Keir Starmer, even the word Starmerites, I always feel it should have an asterisk and a footnote. So what is a Starmerite? What does a Starmerite believe? What is it they think that their man stands for, that the other guy, in this case Wes Streeting and Andy Burnham, any challenger you could name, what's the difference? So what is so great about Keir Starmer? That seems to be the question that the Prime Minister's allies now need urgently to answer. Otherwise, the framing will be exactly as you describe it. It will be a rearguard action to protect a weakened leader on the grounds On the grounds of what? On the grounds that if you keep doing this, things are going to get worse? I mean, this is not the strongest political message. I think we come down to a question which, number 10, Keir Starmer himself have found very difficult to answer, is what are you for? What do you care about more than anything else? We know that you have actually, I should say this, because speaking this week from Germany, Keir Starmer has a slightly better reputation abroad than at home. Fine. But his fate is decided at home in the UK and ultimately by his MPs and ministers at Westminster. What is it that he is saying is the reason you should keep me, Keir Starmer, and you should stop this nonsense because we can go forward together, we can make the country better, and we can recover the fate of the Labour Party? If you can't answer that question, then exactly what you predicted will happen, and it will be a dissolution, and it may happen even ahead of May, let alone what's likely to result. And how good is this in terms of lining up a recovery for Labour in local elections in the spring? I mean, it's going backwards.
What is so great about Keir Starmer? What a great question. Maybe we'll find out at midday with Prime Minister's questions, or maybe not. But on that note, we have to keep to time, and it's going to be a monumental 24 hours. So I can't wait to see you again tomorrow morning, Anne, for the last Politics of Sam and Anne's of this week. But my goodness, it's taken a dramatic turn. See you in 24 hours.
Yeah, another slow news day.
Hey, it's Sophie and Will from Sky News.
Too many headlines, too little time?
We get it, and that's why we're bringing you Cheat Sheet.
10 minutes every weekday morning.
All the big stories from politics to pop culture, minus the noise.
No doom scrolling, no spin, just the stories that matter from two people who live and breathe the news. Cheat Sheet with Ridge and Frost from Sky News.
Follow Cheat Sheet wherever you get your podcasts.